Hi, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here with the Ruttenberg Library. I wanted to come to you this afternoon with a book chat. I've been reading the book Reelecting Lincoln, The Battle for the 1864 Presidency by John C. Waugh. I've been reading this over the last couple weeks. It is a very, very good book. I'm a fan of John C. Waugh's. He's written several books. I own 3 of them, and I've read all 3 of them, and I've enjoyed all 3, and I probably enjoyed this one the most of all 3 of these. So this book is let's see here, just a second, sorry, it's a Crown Publishers Incorporated out of New York, and it is from 1997 is when the publishing date for this. This book is 452 pages, and it's got all the various people he talks about in the book. It's got a nice collection of photos in the middle, as you can see, and there's a whole bunch more. I like the photo on the front. That really drew my attention when I first saw the book. But John C. Waugh, he's a great author. I'll give you the little synopsis on the back cover. John C. Waugh is a newspaper journalist turned historical reporter. He was a staff correspondent and bureau chief for the chief for the Christian Science Monitor for many years. He has also served on the staffs of Vice President Nelson Rockefeller and U.S. Senator Jeff Bingaman of New Mexico. His previous book, The Class of 1846, won the New York Civil War Roundtable's Fletcher Pratt Literary Award for the best nonfiction book on the Civil War, published in 1994. Waugh lives in Arlington, Texas. So he's from Texas. He's a fan of the Civil War. He writes a lot about the Civil War. He's wrote some stuff on Lincoln himself. And as I said, 3 of his books that I've got, like I said, I've read all 3 of them. On the Brink of Civil War, The Compromise of 1850 and How It Changed the Course of American History. I really like that book. It's one of my favorite books. It might not be for a average reader. It's more for somebody that knows what's going on during the historical time period. Lincoln and McClellan, The Troubled Partnership Between a President and His General. I enjoyed that book, but it did not flow as well as this particular one did, Reelecting Lincoln. I thought this had a great flow to the text, and I really like how he put, on that description, it's a newspaper journalist turned historical reporter. I'm going to come back to that, historical reporter. But John C. Waugh, he's got a bachelor's from the University of Arizona. He's worked in journalism, and he's a historian. He's won various awards as an author. He had the introduction to the Texas Institute of Letters in 2011, the Fort Worth Civil War Roundtable Pate Distinguished Service Award in 2012, the Houston Civil War Roundtable Frank E. Vandiver Award of Merit, 2013, New York Civil War Roundtable Fletcher Pratt Award in 1994, Daughters of the American Revolution History Award Medal in 1998, and the Grady McWhinney Award of Merit in 2000. And I just think that he writes a great historical narrative. This is the stuff he's writing. It can definitely touch the average reader. You don't have to be necessarily well schooled in history to like his stuff. It's for the average reader, but at the same token, even though it's for the average reader, somebody who has a lot of historical background is also going to enjoy this book. He used a lot of primary sources. You can tell in the back of the book, if you look through his sourcing, he does a really good job using the letters and newspapers and journals and all that kind of stuff from the people of the time period. It's very easy to read, understand, and enjoy. Let's see here. Let's get into the meat of this book. So, as the title says, Reelecting Lincoln, the battle for the 1864 presidency. That's what the whole story is about. And Waugh opens the book in in 1863, actually, in around October, November of 1863, and he starts talking about, setting up the story of what's going on historically, but giving you the context of everything heading into the 1864 election. And just to let you know, I've read a lot of stuff on Lincoln. I've got a lot of books in my library, and I've read about the 1864 election in those books, but I've never read. This is my first book solely on the election of 1864. The rest of them were just biographies on Lincoln, and maybe there was a chapter or two discussing the election. This is all about the election. It's going to take all of the events of the time period and show how they really wrapped into that election, what their impact on the election was, and what the election's impact was going to be on the people and the events going on in the time period. I thought he did a really good job with that. So anyway, this is going to be a great addition to just my knowledge of the time period. I was aware of a lot of the stuff, but there was a couple new things that I want to share with you. So he's going to take this from October, November, right in there, 1863, all the way through the election in November of 1864. I think John C. Waugh's strength, in my opinion, is describing the characters of the time. I think he does an excellent job of giving you that description of what each of the people are like, and then how those people and their attitudes, just their character altogether, how that plays into all of the events that are going on. I am a person who asks a lot of the little questions. Well, what did this guy look like? To help me, visualize all of the people. Like if we're talking about a certain meeting, the people that are in that meeting, what do they look like? What type of people are they? Are they grumpy? Are they happy? Are they, whatever? And John C. Waugh really fed into that for me. He gave me a great description of all of the main characters he's talking about. So, let's see here. Some of the people he's going to talk about. This is going to be kind of the highlights. I got kind of a long list here, so if you'll bear with me. He talks about Abe Lincoln, his secretaries John Hay and John Nicolay. He talks about the three main New York newspaper journalists and editors of the time period, James Gordon Bennett, Horace Greeley, and Henry Raymond. He talks about August Belmont, Edward Bates, John C. Fremont, Jesse Fremont, Montgomery Blair, Frank Blair, Sr. and Jr., Noah Brooks, Ben Butler, Sarah Butler, Simon Cameron, Zachariah Chandler, Thaddeus Stevens, Salmon Chase, Kate Chase, Samuel Sunset Cox, Ulysses Grant, Anna Elizabeth Dickinson, Clement Van Landingham, and there was a whole host of others. I'm not going to be able to hit them all, but he gave a great description of a lot of these descriptions that maybe I hadn't heard before, where I'd maybe heard them offhand in one book, but I didn't get the actual visual description of them. And when I talk about visual description, let me give you an example. I think he does an excellent job of this. So he talks about Anna Elizabeth Dickinson, and maybe I'd read about her and I just didn't realize it. I could not remember, but let me give you this description that he gives for her. He says, Anna Elizabeth Dickinson had only just turned 22, but she was the phenomenon of the nation's oratorical circuit. On January 16th, she was to address a public meeting in the hall of the House of Representatives. Lincoln had received her in the White House earlier in the day and had planned to attend her lecture in the Capitol later that evening. If there was ever a comet from nowhere, bursting without warning on the public ken, dazzling it with brilliant light, it was Anna Dickinson. Until age 18, she had been an obscure Quaker girl from Philadelphia, working in the United States Mint. Her unsuspected talent for oratory had erupted unheralded one evening in early 1860 at a meeting of the Association of Progressive Friends in Philadelphia. A man had made a case for female inferiority that had lit Anna's fuse. She had leaped to her feet, and the oratory had poured eloquently out, and a star was born. And, it just goes on to give brief descriptions of her. Talks about when she was talking, what it was like to sit in there. So Like, here's a physical description that he gives for her. Anna was an open-faced, sunny and bright. Her nose was Grecian, her chin set. Her eyes were large and gray and flashing, and her hair was short and black and wavy, curling slightly and tossing about her head as she spoke. She was of medium height and slender, but with a full, graceful figure. Early in her meteoric career, she had kept that figure clothed in simple Quaker gray with its white surplice. But as her fame grew, she began dressing in a style halfway between that of Quakerism and the world. And by 1864, she had become a fashion plate known on occasion to wear diamonds and lace. Newspaper reporters debated among themselves whether she was beautiful or merely handsome and prepossessing. And so, it just goes on to give lots of different from, if you were sitting in the room, what was it like to hear her, to just a basic physical description if you were to see her on the stage. And I knew nothing about her, at least that I could remember. And so that was a new person that I learned about. Most of the people on this list I knew something about. There were two women that were new to me, her and then Sarah Butler, which is Ben Butler's wife. And he gives a great description of her as well. Let's see here. His description of Butler is funny, Benjamin Butler. He gives a contrast between him and Lincoln, and they're basically polar opposites. But it says, let's see, Butler had been a slight, sickly youth and a young man, a 97-pound weakling when he graduated from Waterville College in Maine at the age of 20. But that had been 25 years ago, and he now had his full ration of bodily, I can't even say the word, to go with his thick, bald, bullet-shaped head. But Butler's most startling physical characteristic was his eyes. They were wildly, blatantly crossed in a textbook case of strabismus. One observer who had the misfortune to be hailed before him when he was the military governor of New Orleans 2 years earlier testified that those two eyes also were at cross purposes, vastly different in function and expression. From one seemed to look out benignantly, and that victim remembered, and from the other, malignity. Anyway, he just goes on to under Butler's bullet dome, and he gives funny descriptions like that are fully entertaining when you're reading this, and it gives you that visual of the people. And he does the same thing for Butler's wife. And talks about her importance, and he shows how the women were just as important as the men. They were their backers in a lot of cases. But the behind the scenes movers and shakers. And I just really liked that. I thought it was great. If you move forward to, he does a really good one of Horace Greeley, and if you've ever seen pictures of Horace Greeley, he's kind of a funny looking guy, and he plays on that, and he talks about Greeley and just how big of a pain in the hiney he was for Lincoln. Let's see here. The main events that he talks about in the book, so I'll kind of go through them, and these are not necessarily in order, but he goes over the Emancipation Proclamation and how big an issue that was for the Republicans, because not all of them wanted the Emancipation Proclamation, and Lincoln kind of pushed that forward. He goes into the Gettysburg Address just a little bit, not a lot. Let's see. He talks about Salmon Chase a lot and his presidential aspirations, and how his ambitions had to be cooled, or at least put in their place, in order for him to solidify that Republican nomination. He had to deal with the radical Republicans, and just the split in the Republican Party itself between the radicals and the conservatives. And by the time 1864 comes around, or November of 1864, he has to bring all that together to get them to work together. He talks about the radicals and how they wanted John C. Fremont again for their nominee. He goes into what was going on with the Democratic Party between the War Democrats and the Peace Democrats, and how the Democrats really put together a peace party platform, but they had a war candidate with General McClellan, and that just didn't work out real well for the Democrats. Lost them a lot of votes. Matter of fact, that's going to be one of the main things that John C. Waugh says in this book. It's one of his main ideas for the whole book, is not necessarily did Lincoln beat him, but it was probably more the Democrats losing it for themselves. And he goes and he shows in several times how the Democrats probably could have won this election if they'd have done things right. He goes into the issues with the Copperheads, the treason and the plots that they did to free the prisoners of war, the Southern prisoners of war that were in the Northern camps. He talks about Ulysses Grant and how all the political parties wanted to use him as a candidate, and he had to make sure that Grant was not running against him, and that Grant's main aim was to win the war. Talks about the abolitionists, and how he had to deal with them. The peace talks with the South. A lot of people were trying to get peace talks, namely Horace Greeley was really on board with that. And Lincoln's going to really kind of put Horace Greeley in his place, because Horace Greeley wanted to run his mouth, but he never actually wanted to take charge and do something about it. And Lincoln said, okay, if this is the way it's going to be, then if we're going to have peace talks, we have to have the Union whole, and there cannot be any slavery. And so you go be the spokesperson. And Horace Greeley was like, whoa, and he didn't want any part of it. So that if the idea actually flopped, it would fall on Lincoln and not Greeley. And of course, Greeley always had ambitions to be president also. As we head towards November of 1864, late summer, we're going to have 3 big victories. And this book, by the way, does not talk about a lot of the actual battlefield stuff. There's not much on the battlefield stuff. It just briefly talks about, it's mainly political stuff, what's going on with the political parties and the movers and shakers with this election. It briefly did talk about how the Sherman taking Atlanta, Sheridan in the Shenandoah, and Farragut down in Mobile, how those 3 battles right before the election really helped to win and solidify things for the Republicans. It went through, and I'm not going to go through and read it, but it went through the great story of Lincoln going out to the battlefield himself and being told by one of the men, "Get down, you fool!" And the guy didn't really realize he was talking to Abraham Lincoln at the time. Let's see here. So this book, I thought it was a great story. I would recommend it to anybody that's studying the 1864 election, studying the Civil War. I think it's valuable. I think it is accessible to the average reader. It's not just for history buffs. I think the average reader could enjoy this. If I was to give it a ranking, I'd probably give it 5 stars. I enjoyed it that much. I enjoyed it, its readability much more than the other 2 that I'd mentioned earlier. And anyway, it was a great book. Like I said, the final summary on page 359, I'll just read this real fast. This kind of gives you it says, "This politically astute man knew better than most why he still had these responsibilities on his back. I am here," he told another friend, "by the blunders of the Democrats. If, instead of resolving that the war was a failure, they had resolved that I was a failure and denounced me for not more vigorously prosecuting it, I should not have been reelected." And so, that quote right there, I think, speaks volumes for John C. Waugh's entire book, because that's kind of what the whole thing is about, is how, Lincoln has to get all the support of all the Republicans, get everybody on board, and the Democrats did some knothead things to split the party and split their own party and not give themselves a chance to win. And that quote alone really kind of speaks volumes for this. But anyway, I would say it's a 5-star read for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was well researched, well told, very well told. Again, that line of, he's a newspaper journalist turned historical reporter. So, he's not writing this from an academic standpoint. He's writing it for readability for the average reader. And just for that purpose, I think he did a really great job. And I'd recommend this if you're a Civil War fan, if you're a Lincoln fan, or if you like history. So anyway, this has been Bill Ruttenberg from the Ruttenberg Library, and my book chat with Reelecting Lincoln. If you got any questions on this, I kind of went fast there. If you got any questions, put that down in the comments. And thank you for watching. Happy reading.